Please take your seats. I'd like to call this fall meeting and workshop of the Climate Initiatives Task Force to order. Today is Friday, November 4th, 2022. Ms. Cooper, would you mind coming to call the roll, please?
Good afternoon, members, if you can hear me. Harry Vorhoff.
Here.
Here. Greg Bowser.
Here.
Laura Beauchamp.
Here.
Bliss Higgins.
Here.
Dr. Virginia Burkett. She's not here. Selby Bush. She's not here. Dr. Terrence Chambers.
Here.
Flozell Daniels. Not here. Mark Moses.
Here.
Karen Gautreaux.
Here.
Tyler Gray. He's not here. Bryn Haas.
Here.
Tim Hardy. He's going to be late. Blake Canfield.
Here.
Camille Manning-Broom.
Here.
Chief Cheryl Parfait Dardar. Not here. Colette Pichon Battle. Not here. Brad Lambert.
Here.
Bill Robertson. Jeff Schwartz. He'll be late. Joey Bro.
Here.
Dr. Eric Calavoda.
Here.
And Rob Burchick. We do have a quorum. Yeah.
Barely.
Yes, barely.
All right. Ooh. Yeah. Testing. All right, much better. All right, well, welcome everybody to the Climate Task Force meeting and workshop. I'm sorry to kind of have my back to some of y'all, but that's just the way this room layout goes. But it's going to be a really full meeting, really excited to see all of you in person. It's been a busy year, or 9 months. It's been a busy year since we finally completed and approved the Climate Action Plan. We've had the IIJA since our meeting, or before our meeting in our workshop meeting in March, and then our task force meeting in July. But then we also had the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed at the federal level in August of this year. So really just hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars really, that are going to support in part the Climate Action Plan. And we, as a state, individually, associations, companies, and state government are all trying to do our best to bring as many dollars to Louisiana as possible to really accelerate and lean into the energy transition and decarbonizing our society, our economy, really for the benefit of not only ourselves but for generations to come. So we have, we mixed it up a little bit in terms of not only room arrangement, but in terms of time of day and really the format. And so we wanted this to be very interactive. We'll have a relatively short Climate Task Force meeting where we'll provide information about what the Inflation Reduction Act is, and also do a little refresher on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, also sometimes referred to as bipartisan infrastructure law or bill. There are a ton of acronyms. Please, I just want to stress, they can be a lot. If you don't know what or remember what an acronym is, please don't hesitate to ask or pull one of us aside and ask, because we don't want any, the alphabet soup to stand in the way of people fully understanding what's going on. So this is really meant for all levels of familiarity with these federal laws, as well as just climate change, climate mitigation as well. And part of this work today will then go to inform our annual report, which we will provide to this task force in our January meeting for approval, which we'll then send to Governor Edwards to give him a status update 1 year after completion of the Climate Action Plan. And so with that, we will now go to approval of the minutes before getting a breakdown of the IIJA and IRA climate provisions from Jackson and Lindsay. So we have a motion from Ms. Manning-Broom to approve the minutes from our last meeting, a second from Brent Haas. Thank you. Any public comment? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. All right, we've approved the minutes from our last meeting. So now I'd like to call Jackson Wright and Lindsay Cooper to the dais and to present out to provide a breakdown of the IIJA and IRA climate provisions. Thank you.
Perfect, we're working over here. Can everyone hear me? I'll just be really close to the microphone. I am just going to kick us off briefly today, and then I'll pass it over to Jackson. He'll do the Infrastructure Act overview, and then I'll come back and do the Inflation Reduction Act overview. But I just wanted to set our day, as Harry mentioned, with some of the outcomes that we'll be working towards. We're really excited to have all of you together and in person. So I wanted to just set the table at the beginning as to what we'll be looking to accomplish throughout this meeting. As Harry mentioned, one of our top priorities is breaking down the complexity of all these provisions related to climate. The bill text for each of these is about 1,000 pages long each. So we want this to be an opportunity to take a 30,000-foot view at some priority provisions. And then as the task force, we'll take time to share progress, success, and shortcomings of our ongoing implementation. And then we'll move into the workshop portion where we'll focus on shared identification of partnerships and then constraints on identifying for certain funding opportunities moving forward. So our goal at the end of the day is clarifying these climate provisions as well as the partnerships and the constraints that need to be addressed for Louisiana to really have success as we move into a lot of the competitive funding. And with that, I will hand it over to Jackson Wright, our infrastructure coordinator.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jackson Wright, Director of Special Projects and Infrastructure Coordinator in the Governor's Office. Thanks for this awesome turnout today for the workshop. Thanks, Harry and Lindsay, for asking me to come talk about my favorite topic, which is the IIJA. And for those of you who are, I don't know, can you hear me well enough when I talk like this? Okay, I don't want to lean over. Great. So. Oh, yeah. So just as a quick refresher, like Lindsay mentioned, the IIJA, otherwise known as Bill or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, became law a year ago, basically, or at least I think November 15th is the actual anniversary. It's billions of dollars in opportunity for Louisiana across multiple federal agencies and really hundreds of different grant programs. And when you kind of break down the law, and this is one way to slice it. There's many ways. Most of this, it's probably hard to read the text, but the orange box is transportation-related funded programs. The yellow is energy. Then the next biggest one that's light blue is broadband. The dark blue is water. Then it's the turquoise is watersheds and coastline, and et cetera. Kind of, there's some other ones that are in there as well, including environmental remediation. But when we break down zoom into the energy category, which is relevant for our discussion today in the workshop, you can see that about half of it, of the $98 billion that's identified in this chart, is fuels and technology. And then you've got grid infrastructure, reliability and resilience, supply chains, energy efficiency. Those are just some of the things. And you can, by the way, you can go to the Brookings Hub and you can zoom in on this if you want. Looking at another example, when you look at the watersheds and coastlines, thinking about resilience as just part of the Climate Action Plan, There's money there for flood mitigation and management, watershed health and restoration, oceans and coastal resources, among other things, including Western water infrastructure, which unfortunately I don't think we're eligible for, but there's a lot of money for that. In terms of outside of the subject, content area of the law, there's something interesting to point out about the IIJA is that there are the chart on the left shows that the blue part of that pie chart shows that the overwhelming number of programs that are in the law are competitive or discretionary. However, most of the funding, which is the right chart, the green, is formula funded. So most of the money in the infrastructure law flows to existing formula programs, in particular ones that are administered by the Department of Transportation. However, there are many, many, many competitive programs that are relatively smaller amounts of money, but we're still large, in the grand scheme of things. So what does that kind of look like broken out by new and existing programs? And you can see, like I said, most of the funding is for existing highway programs, which is this green chart, green section of the bar up at the very top of the chart for highways. But you can also see that there's $48 billion for under commerce for broadband, or within energy, $36 billion, half of which is new, half of it's for existing programs for new funds, among other things. The list goes on. And so across all of these opportunities, formula, competitive, hundreds of different programs, new, old, the White House has identified some common priorities that are really important for the state to keep in mind as we are approaching these, and for any entity that's looking to receive funds from the infrastructure law. And that's climate, specifically addressing climate change, equity, which we'll talk about a little later in Justice 40, workforce or labor concerns, and then what the White House has called Made in America, otherwise known as Buy America, Build America, but some provisions around where the materials and products that are used as this bill is implemented come from, and they would like many of them to come from the United States or be made in the United States. And so how does that translate to the state's approach, or the governor's office approach to the IIJA? Our main goals are here. I mean, number one is we want to maximize funding for Louisiana that we can get from the IIJA. And that's keeping those climate, equity, and workforce priorities in mind. That's going to require coordination across state agencies, which I have been doing for the last year, and also aligning our priorities with local government and community organizations, industry partners, and many other interested parties who may have a stake in the opportunities in the law, but also may be direct applicants for some of these competitive programs. The second and most relevant to today is that the goal of our approach to the infrastructure law is to advance the climate action plan. And that's especially important for the competitive programs that are in the infrastructure law. We also have prioritized supporting local governments who are pursuing funding. In this year, I guess, earlier this year's session, $25 million was appropriated to support local governments in pursuit of infrastructure law competitive funds. And this is also relevant. I believe the White House earlier this week had a Talent Pipeline Challenge Summit, and that is about this last priority, which is generating good jobs and making sure that the funding that comes from this law is distributed equitably across the state, not just what communities are receiving funds, but also who's doing the work and who's receiving the contracts that come from this opportunity. And so next, I just want to cover some highlights, some highlighted details, some progress over the last year. It's a moving target, though, with things are developing every week. There's new announcements of new awards and new application deadlines, but just a very high level. When it comes to roads and bridges, Louisiana expects to receive about $6 billion over 5 years in formula funds. But there's also numerous competitive grants within that category, like that the state has applied for and many local governments have applied for and some have received, and like the Bridge Investment Program, MEGA for mega projects, the Infra Program for significant infrastructure, and the RAISE Grant Program. There is also when it comes to broadband and internet, Louisiana was the first state to receive planning funds for the $40 billion national pot for broadband. That's a great accomplishment. We're working really hard to make sure that we implement that program as quickly as possible and meet the goal of the program, which is to eliminate the number of unserved and underserved locations in the state. When it comes to water, just in the fiscal year 22, there's $100 million in Louisiana for clean and safe drinking and wastewater, including funds for lead service line replacement. And these pots of money and the funds from the infrastructure law are going to complement the efforts that we've put in the water sector program as well. When it comes to electric vehicles, our state plan for the NEVI program, which is the formula program for the creation of a nationwide network of electric vehicle charging across the interstate corridors and major highways. That was approved, and so we will expect to receive about $70 million over 5 years. You may have seen in the news recently there was an announcement for 2 Louisiana companies to receive funds for EV battery materials manufacturing. And then there was also a recent announcement about rebate funding from EPA for 111 clean school buses in school districts across the state. When it comes to clean energy and power, the state is pursuing the regional hydrogen hub opportunity with 2 other states, and also looking at, and this is especially relevant today, other opportunities in the infrastructure law that would accelerate the climate action plan. There's a power grid resilience formula program that we are actively engaged in, thanks to many efforts of many people in the room, especially Lindsay, and that will inform our approach to a very large competitive pot on grid resilience. And then this is one that's not often talked about in the news, but there's a significant increase in allocation for weatherization of residential homes that actually was just increased again through, I think, IRA funds or some other source yesterday, I think, or the day before. And then on resilience, large investment in the infrastructure law nationally, and just in 2022, there was about $270 million allocated to Louisiana for this purpose through the infrastructure law. And then last but not least, we have $47 million that is going toward legacy pollution cleanup, which includes funds addressing orphan oil and gas wells. And so that is, I believe there was a press release recently about that, right, from DNR. Okay. And I mentioned this earlier, but when we talk about our overall implementation and when we think about equity considerations, the White House has set a goal of what they call Justice40 and via executive order. And what Justice40 means is that 40% of the benefits of the whatever program is covered under Justice40 is supposed to be realized within a disadvantaged community. And this applies to many programs in the infrastructure law, and put out guidance on how they are interpreting and implementing Justice 40, and it's very relevant for a lot of the infrastructure law programs and the Inflation Reduction Act. But if you haven't seen it before, the White House Council on Environmental Quality has put out a tool, an interactive tool, where you can go in and see what census tracts are considered disadvantaged communities according to CEQ. This is a beta tool that they are updating over time, but it's part of that Justice 40 definition. And you can really drill down and see how they've defined a disadvantaged community. There's all sorts of different ways that metrics that they index together to come up with that definition. Okay, and with that, that's a very broad overview of what's going on with the infrastructure law. Thanks everybody for having me present, and turn it over to Lindsay to talk about the IRA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I am going to transition us to the Inflation Reduction Act. So this, very different from what we saw in the Infrastructure Act, as it focuses on transportation. The Inflation Reduction Act is primarily focused on energy security, climate change. It was passed on August 16th of 2022, so there's a lot in motion right now, and I'll just caveat my coming 4 slides that everyone classifies some of these opportunities differently, that some go under energy or industry or communities, because there's not a lot that's been defined in statute, even though it is a pretty long statute. So as this slide shows, there's a lot in this bill, not only covering climate, but also around the Affordable Care Act extension. And the way that these investments are funded is through the 4 bullets at the top. So revenue is raised through this bill through a 15% corporate tax minimum, a prescription drug pricing reform, tax reform, interest loophole reform. So that generates about $439 billion. And then the climate investments through this bill are about $369 billion. So about half of the investment that we see will go towards climate. A small portion goes to the Affordable Care Act, and the rest of it goes to deficit reduction, hence its name, Inflation Reduction Act. So I developed the graph on the right to show where the climate investments are being prioritized. So as you can see, about half of the funding in the IRA for climate is for these huge tax credits. So that's around wind, solar storage, and then carbon capture and hydrogen use. What you see on the left side is more from all the grant programs, where there's grants around manufacturing transition, nuclear, hydrogen, CCS, clean vehicles, residential energy, but the transit focus is much smaller here, and you get a lot more of the focus on energy transition. And the goal of this act is really to scale up our deployment of renewable and clean technology. So I'm going to take at a very high level over the next 3 slides these provisions just related to energy and climate. We're going to focus on that today. So the first category that I'll break down is around manufacturing. So this bill approaches, or I guess this act now, it approaches climate from the manufacturing side as well as the energy deployment side. So not only do we want to deploy more renewables, we want and need to incentivize the infrastructure and just the construction of solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, critical minerals, those kinds of facilities. There's also a lot of tax credit for component parts like wind turbines and photovoltaic cells. So they're very thorough in the way that they assess our manufacturing needs. To go even further, there's grants to retool auto manufacturing for clean vehicles, loans to build new clean vehicle manufacturing. But there are a lot of grant programs as well that are helping industry transition and decarbonize their processes. So there's an element of just transitioning manufacturing in general, but another element of decarbonizing the industry that we know we'll still need in the future, such as like chemicals that we have down in Louisiana. So this is one part. The next part that I'll highlight is on clean energy deployment. So clean energy generation in this bill is a huge focus. It's about $125 billion, almost half of that. Half of the climate investment. So one way this comes through is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is going to be a revolving loan program to provide financing to help people purchase renewable energy more on a distributed scale, so at a homeowner scale. The other element is that $51 billion that's focused on tax credits for solar energy storage, battery interconnection on larger properties. So we're talking commercial properties, industrial facilities, and there are a few caveats around some of the tax credits I'll talk about as well. More so even around the generation, there's clean hydrogen and nuclear tax credits. Then we move more into the deployment of clean energy generation more broadly. So there's $11.7 billion for rural communities to have renewable energy and energy storage pilot programs as well. On the consumer energy cost reduction side, it's much more thorough than what we see in the IIJA. So here we have not only home energy rebate programs for electrifying appliances and efficiency implementation, but there's also tax credits for consumers to implement clean energy, to put solar on their rooftops, for used and new clean vehicles. So the goal here is to break down a lot of the barriers that keep all of us and everyday people from having clean products in their house and clean energy. The last big bucket that I'll highlight is around community investment. So there's about $60 billion in this bill. Again, it's challenging to put these together because a lot of, as Jackson mentioned, a lot of the other programs are covered under Justice 40. But specifically for communities that are disadvantaged and rural communities as well, there's about $90 billion. So that includes environmental and climate justice block grants for communities to lead their own pollution reduction projects, projects for communities to reconnect their communities that were previously broken up by highways or by transit. There are also elements of port air pollution reduction, reducing pollution from heavy-duty vehicles, and the Superfund pollution tax. Then there's such a large investment for rural communities. So we look at disadvantaged communities and then rural communities, particularly farmers. There's billions of dollars for climate smart agriculture. So that's in a lot of the traditional conservation programs like on-farm conservation. There's just a $10 billion new investment there that we'll see in the Farm Bill next year. There's also funding for healthy, sustainable forest, urban tree planting, alongside domestic production of biofuels, aviation, sustainable aviation fuel. That's incentivized on both the production side, but also the landowner, the farmer side for producing renewable biofuels. And the last category here is around conservation and restoration of coastal habitats. So this is an expansion of the fund that has started through the IIJA. A lot of that money was just released, I think, this summertime. So this is just building and expanding on that program. So again, at very high level, but the main buckets of funding we see here are around community investment, energy manufacturing, and then just wide-scale clean energy deployment. So the last thing I'll note, I talked a lot about the economic impact of this act, but I wanted to highlight the emission reduction impact as well. So in talking with the Rhodium group, they wanted to quantify how this act reduces emissions, not only creates a significant economic impact, and how does this actually advance us towards the climate goals that we have as the nation, which is a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 and a 100% reduction in emissions from the power sector by 2035. So you can see that even with the IIJA, with the Infrastructure Act, we only get to about 25% conservatively reduction in GHGs by 2030. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, we have potential to hit upwards of 40% reduction by 2030. So it has that potential to increase it from anywhere from 10 to 20% of the emission reduction impact we'll see, and that's really from a lot of the provisions around manufacturing and around wide-scale deployment that will make investing for everyday people a lot easier in having clean energy accessible to them. So with that, I'll hand it back over to our chair so that we can hear from you all on the approaches that you've been taking to implement these two acts.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cooper. Before you head back, just want to make sure if anybody has any questions for Lindsay. Covered a lot of material, although I think made a very complex couple of bills or a couple of laws as clear as possible with respect to climate. But any questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, Lindsay. And with that, we have some time reserved just to share amongst task force members updates on things they've been working relative to IIJA, IRA, or just generally climate mitigation. I will call on you if you don't raise your hand. All right, Dr. Calavoda.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Most relevant to the climate task force here and our climate action plan is our effort to move forward with EV charging infrastructure deployment. And there is, as one of the speakers noted, there is a formula allocation for that, and we will receive approximately $73 million in federal funds over 5 years for that. In addition to that, there's a grant program. Our first task is to use the formula funds, and we are pursuing a grant program with that. Our Department of Transportation Development does not own any gas stations, and we do not want to own any EV charging stations either. We want the private sector to do that, and most every other state Department of Transportation is pursuing that same approach. So we have a grant program we're going to be rolling out in early 2023. We have a public hearing on our grant program on the 10th of this month from 6 to 8 p.m. It's in our auditorium at our building, but there is a Zoom link, and that Zoom link is available on our website if you're interested in tuning into that. What we are going to be presenting there is our draft application and our draft scoring criteria for how we're going to rank the applications we get from people who are interested in having an EV charging infrastructure on their piece of property. So we have also applied for a number of grants. They're very specific to projects, a couple of very large-scale bridges, and some ferries. And then we've applied for a Reconnecting Communities grant as well. Those aren't particularly pertinent to the Climate Task Force, but we are pursuing those opportunities under IIJA.
Thank you, Dr. Calavoda. Very exciting on the progress on the NEVI, the EV charging infrastructure. That's a big one.
Let me just make a couple more comments on that. We're kind of out on a limb here on this because the final rules on the EV charging infrastructure program have not come out yet. They had draft rules in the summer, which we viewed as problematic because they were set up as if it was going to be publicly owned, publicly operated, publicly maintained infrastructure, and that's not the approach we're using, nor any other state that I'm aware of. The other thing that's looming out there, and I'm wondering about even with the money for school buses and stuff, is the whole Buy America provisions. And so they have not come out with the final rules on that either. And I think many people believe in Buy America, myself being one of them. You know, the export of our industrial base was a mistake from a national security perspective, but it doesn't come back overnight. It didn't leave overnight. It's not coming back overnight. And if there's going to be a rigid set of rules come out on Buy America, I think we're going to have problems all across the whole spectrum.
Thank you, Dr. Calavoda. Mr. Haas.
Thank you. So I think from a kind of big picture perspective, I just want to mention one of the initiatives that we've been involved in coordination, of course, with the Governor's Office, with the Water Institute of the Gulf, and with other partners, and that is really to develop a defensible methodology for quantifying carbon capture associated with our coastal projects. And importantly, not just quantifying those, but having a defensible methodology that can actually be accredited so that we can begin to participate in carbon markets for all of the obvious reasons. Certainly, from our perspective, we want to seek alternative funding sources for the coastal program. This is a two birds with one stone, kind of a solution there. More specifically, I would just say that associated with a number of the grants that opportunities through IIJA, and one of these is actually a DERSA grant, but it's very similar. We've been successful in either being awarded grants to implement projects or to be invited to submit full proposals on 6 projects through the NIFWIF Emergency Coastal Resilience Fund, the NIFWIF National Coastal Resilience Fund, NOAA's OCM Fund, as well as the NIFWIF America the Beautiful Fund. So I won't go into the details of those, but there are 6 projects out there that wouldn't be on the ground but for the efforts of groups like these, and of course the funds being made available through this act.
Thank you, Mr. Haas. Yeah, and the development of carbon markets with respect to the coastal program is directly is one of the actions, or actually a set of strategies within the climate action plan. So we're really excited that that is developing and that we're working together on that.
Yep. Thank you.
Mr. Canfield.
Thanks, Harry. So the Department of Natural Resources has 2 main things to report regarding IIJA funding. The first is dealing with the orphan well program that is overseen by the Department of Interior. And through that, we were given a $25 million initial grant. And we have also been given $12.7 roughly million from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. We have decided to combine both of those to try to get an efficient process for plugging as many wells as possible. We have recently selected 2 CMARs, or basically general contract managers, to oversee projects, again, kind of initially focused in North Louisiana. We are definitely planning and expecting to plug more than double the number of wells that are annually plugged by our state program. In addition to that, we're using some of this money to come up with methane emission measurement protocols and to evaluate or compare and correlate the data that we do receive from measurements at these sites with well characterization, and also to combine that with well cost information so that we can begin using that as a prioritization for future projects, and again, to be able to select the biggest bang for the buck as far as reduction of methane emissions within our orphan well program. We will begin doing some of this methane emission monitoring and other types of environmental assessments this next week or 2, and hopefully we'll have actual dirt work moving by the end of the month. And this will then lead into the larger sums of money under this program, including the formula grant. So one aspect of this as well is to the 3 things that are considered in the formula grant and in determining how much Louisiana will receive, or the number of orphan wells, the estimated cost to address those wells, and the impact on unemployment numbers from the oil and gas sector. And we are seeing that the cost estimates are likely to rise from our initial estimates. The number of wells will likely rise. So our hope is we will end up receiving more money than I think the initial estimate from Department of Interior was concerned. Looking kind of at challenges that we face, one major one is trying to get more clarity on the timing of the next sets of funding. We definitely do not want to set up a process and a system that is up and running and working and then have to shut it down due to uncertainty regarding funding or budgets. And so we are working pretty well, I think, with the Department of Interior and expressing these concerns. They've been very good to us in outreach and communicating on that. So anyway, we're very excited about that program as we move forward. Very very quickly, and unfortunately, Jason Lonklow, who knows far more about this than I, is not here to give you more detail. The other item I wanted to mention was the 3-state clean hydrogen hub application that we're working on, the HALO hub, as it's known. And just to recognize that we are on schedule to submit the very first step in the application process, the concept paper, by the deadline of next Monday. And so with that release, that will be a public document. And while I may not be able to tell you everything, I think that document will give you a lot of insight into that project.
No, that's great. That's a lot of information, a lot happening over at DNR. Mr. Bro.
Thank you, Harry. As Lindsay mentioned earlier, the Farm Bill programs, EQIP namely, there's a lot of good conservation that's been hitting the ground, and that seems to be ramping up a little through special initiatives. Statewide, I would say through EQIP and the Conservation Security Program alone, we average probably, in partnership with NRCS, getting close to 500,000 acres of ag land conservation on the ground. And a big portion of that is nutrient management, residue management, no-till, the things that do increase, most directly increase organic carbon. Additionally, various practices and programs that enhance woodland savanna ecotypes that include prescribed burning and grazing. And people don't normally relate those things to increased soil carbon, but they do. And very important measures, the biomimicry you receive from the herbivory of prescribed grazing and the prescribed burning gets you the fire-resistant forest types that Lindsay mentioned as well. There's a lot of that going on for a net benefit of accrued carbon and biomass. Really good things. Alongside the Farm Bill programs, we have Section 319 of the Clean Water Act, the Agricultural Non-Point Source Abatement Program, and within the major river basins, we have probably close to a dozen watershed-scale agricultural projects. Hemp Creek is an example up in Ouachita. We go into the Red River. The Mermentau Basin is loaded with them. We probably have 6 basin-scale 319 projects going on there. Some fairly new ones, Bayou Grosstet and Bayou Marigouin, getting closer to here, and Bayou du Portage in Iberia and St. Martin. Really active landowners, high participation. We're going to run out of funds soon, and that's a good thing. We'll be looking for more. Regarding IIJA, the conservation districts, our soil and water conservation districts, have long been involved in the PL 566 small watershed program. And within that floodplain management, it can be various things from irrigation management to flood protection, public safety, and that sort of thing. Usually many practices that do also accrue soil carbon that would be of interest to this group. As of the most recent announcement, these PL 566 watershed projects have been funded through IIJA, a process totally unlike we've seen the previous 50 years that we've had the program, more than 50, but more streamlined and more open to local input, which has been a very beneficial thing. Right now, I would say prior to this previous announcement through IIJA, we had maybe half a dozen conservation districts with PL 566 watershed plans in the works. Now we probably have a dozen more. So that's really positive news, and who knows what next year will bring. It's really looking up. As far as the one application that the Office of Soil and Water Conservation within the Department of Ag made toward IIJA had to do with enhancements and development of an ag solid waste beneficial use program. We already have something like that going on in concert with DEQ, and we were looking to expand it. We simply haven't gotten word back. We were applying to the smaller pool of funds within IIJA, and most of that pool, those selections have not been announced yet, so we're keeping our fingers crossed there. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burrow. Ms. Camille Manning-Broom.
Thank you, Chairman. So we had a IIJA workshop on behalf of the governor and the cabinet in March to really help the state agencies align and coordinate and prioritize next steps. And so we'll do a follow-up workshop for the IRA in January. So that is forthcoming, and many of you will hear more about that. We will produce our model solar toolkit. We've been working with landowners and the farming industry, the solar industry, local communities across the state. Right now, we are in draft form of that toolkit. It will be a model solar toolkit that we hope to publish in the first quarter of next year. We are about to publish our first Gonzales climate plan, and what's really exciting about this is that Gonzales will have this plan in preparation for being able to go after a lot more diverse funds through IIJA and IRA than they would have otherwise. And I also wanted to note that Gonzales, in combination with the city of Baton Rouge, received $20 million through the RAISE grant for the passenger rail between Baton Rouge and New Orleans that hopefully will be here in the hopefully next 10 years. And we also have established our Office of State Planning, and I don't know if Lakeisha Hart is here. I mean, I know she's here. I don't know if she's in the room, but this was a big action item in our in the climate initiatives plan, because land use in the built environment is a critical component of of greenhouse gas emissions, and also a tool for climate adaptation to rethink how we do that. And so now the state has an Office of Planning and its first director, so that's really exciting.
Thank you, Ms. Manningbroom. Very exciting stuff there. Any other updates from our task force? Mr. Moses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mark Moses with the Division of Administration. We work mainly with facility planning and control, and we primarily do the vertical construction for the state. We're in the process of updating our energy code. We are also in the process of updating our documents so that we can build more efficient buildings, more resilient, more sustainable buildings. Actually, we have somewhat of a pilot program going on right now. We hired a design professional to renovate a building in Shreveport, and we are using upgraded standards and guidelines, the latest codes to try to get that most efficient building that we can. In addition to that, we are working very closely with the Water Sector Commission that was created by the legislature. Of course, that was funded through the American Rescue Plan Act, and we think it's a good model going forward, that if there's additional funding coming through the IIJA program, that it's a good start. In round one, which was in fiscal year 22, we had over 500 applicants from the state. And in round two, which closed at the end of August, there was another over 300. So we had over 800 applicants of the communities around the state that are looking for help for their water and sewer programs, their systems. We awarded in December of 21 and January of 22, with approval of the Water Sector Commission and the Joint Legislative Committee on the Budget, we awarded right at $300 million worth of projects. Round two, again, we have right at $450 million to award, and we hope those awards will be made this month. We plan to go to the Water Sector Commission on November the 10th, next Thursday, and then hopefully get to the Joint Legislative Committee on the Budget later in the month. So again, with the program, there's $750 million that we hope to move forward, and we believe that to be a good model going forward for any additional funding.
Very exciting. Thank you, Mr. Moses. And Dr. Chambers.
University of Louisiana at Lafayette has a number of existing projects going on. For one, we've recently established a C1 extension service similar to an agricultural outreach service to help companies reduce their C1 emissions. That's being led by Dr. Mark Zappi, who's here, and you could get more information from him about that. We also have an energy efficiency program led by Dr. Solomon Yin, who's also here, could tell you more about that. We're participating in a project to do 20 megawatts worth of solar plus battery grid resiliency type projects for the National Guard. We are working on a microgrid test facility with CLECO, and we're part of the GNO Inc. H to the Future project. We're building a green hydrogen test bed at the university. And also, in terms of new proposals, we're leading a solar workforce development program in partnership with many groups in New Orleans and across the state. Also, a major DOE grid resiliency proposal being led by Dr. Mark Zappi.
Thank you, Dr. Chambers. A lot going on at UL. Any other? Ms. Gotro, and then I'll get you, Bliss.
Thank you. A few months ago, my colleague Lisa Kreisman reported to the task force on the status of the Louisiana Outdoors Forever Act, and we are currently working with the agencies on the project selection board and the technical advisory group to develop the rulemaking. Particularly, we're working on right now the pre-application process. What are the criteria going to be? How it's going to be evaluated? So, I think the objective, the projects that result from that process will be very consistent with the action plan, as well as potentially one of the main reasons we wanted to get this program was to leverage available federal and other dollars. So we're hopefully setting up a system in which they can capture some of these income streams and further the purposes of the task force, the goals and objectives.
That's great, and look forward to learning more as that becomes available. Ms. Higgins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can, I'd like to defer just a couple of minutes to my colleague, the LDQ Deputy Secretary, Ms. Bennett, because she's our point person on IIJA and IRA, and I think she's best positioned to give you an update.
Thank you all for that. Okay, at the department, we have been making lots of submittals for competitive grants that are out there. We reinstated under this governor's administration the Department of Environmental Assessment, and within the Department of Environmental Assessment is our Brownfields program. And since that department has been reinstated and the Brownsfield program has been recreated, we've brought in over $5 million since that program has been reinstated. $500,000 of which was just received recently for environmental assessments. And if you guys don't know what the Brownfield program is, if there's a property that has been contaminated, you can come to the department and request funds so that we can do an assessment. So that's what that $500,000 that has been granted by EPA recently to us is available to do. In addition, we recently received almost $1 million in additional air monitoring, ambient air quality monitoring. It's going to be for the industrial corridors, specifically in St. James. And we're also going to be doing some additional monitoring in the Pineville, Alexandria area, where there are creosote sites. In addition, EPA has added to the Superfund list of cleanup projects the Everwood Evangeline site, and so EPA will be receiving all of the money for the actual cleanup, which is over $45 million. But where this state benefits is that 10%, we generally have to match at 10%, and because we won't, that's going to be, $4.5 million that does not leave the state. So we'll continue to take a look and see what our agency is eligible to apply for, and we are always actively pursuing those competitive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. It is about time to wrap up this portion of our agenda, but I just want to say what we just heard over the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so covers a tremendous breadth of areas as broad as our climate action plan, hitting not only the greenhouse gas reduction goals, but also our other fundamental objectives, restoring our coastal ecosystems, restoring polluted areas, increasing public awareness and accessibility and transparency, as well as many others. And so this only scratches the surface. I know you all could provide many more updates, and so could the folks that are in the audience and participants in this workshop here today. So really looking forward to transitioning this into our workshop. And really, I think it feels to a lot of us that, it's a sprint right now, trying to chase all that federal money that is out there and bringing it to Louisiana, but it's also a marathon. And, not only the 5 years of IIJA spending, but really to get to 2050 as well. And so hopefully by, pulling together, we increase, our muscle mass, and, it feels more like a jog, as we go along and we get accustomed to moving at this speed and hopefully accelerating this speed and building capacity. And that's really what this workshop is designed to do. And so I will ask Ms. Cooper to come back up to the front of the to the room and provide an overview of our first workshop exercise.
Okay, so that really concludes our formal task force meeting. So I hope you're all ready to move around. We have snacks this time, coffee, water, tea. So hopefully that keeps you awake through a Friday afternoon. But I'm going to transition us into our first of 2 exercises this meeting. So both of these exercises